I'm Haryanto coming to you live from the Straits Times newsroom. Now we begin with Prime Minister Loong's keynote speech at this morning's NTUC National Delegates Conference. PM Lee told the packed hall that the PAP will stand by workers as industries undergo changes. He pointed out that in many other parts of the world, change has caused deep-rooted unhappiness as workers who lost jobs were left to fend for themselves. But a symbiotic relationship between the PAP and NTUC can prevent angst and social divisions.
We will always stand with workers, ensure your well-being. We will always do our best to help you and your children progress with Singapore and have a better life.
There you go. Now I have news editor Zakir Hussain with me to tell us more. Zakir, welcome.
Hi.
Now, Zakir, if you could first, tell us what was the reaction of the attendees? Are their fears a little allayed?
I think they were, because job security is top of the minds of many workers, and on the minds of many of the union leaders today. You saw the latest economic numbers. Growth is slowing. Regional demand is down. And there's a genuine concern among workers, as to whether they'll continue to have their jobs. So I think the reassurance that workers are at the heart of the government's thinking and that they will get the help they need is crucial. And I think you have to see PM's message against the backdrop of what NTUC Sec-Gen Ng Chee Meng also presented this morning, the update on the labour movement's work so far. And workers have been helped with training, for instance, and skills upgrading. More than 500,000 training places were made available. And I think there's a question that even if retrenchments were to happen, workers are prepared to sort of move on to the next job, to take on newer jobs and train for them. So I think that reassurance is quite welcome to many of them.
And Zakir, of course, the message of standing by workers and helping them through times of change is not new and rather similar, to previous years. What strikes you the most in PM's speech this morning? I
think it was the examples he cited from abroad. You saw how easily disgruntlement and resentment against governments can fester. So you had the Yellow Vest movement in France, which saw millions take to the streets. And closer to home, you have the Hong Kong protests. And I think PM addressed it quite squarely. He said, what happened in Hong Kong could happen in Singapore if we're not careful. And I think it's also a reminder to not let concerns like cost of living, housing, fester. And I think it's also a reminder, I guess, what PM noted, the unique sort of relationship between the NTUC and the PAP over the past 50 years or so. And I think the labour movement in Singapore has been unique. It's always made sure its interests are represented in government, and at the same time that it sort of takes the path of cooperation and collaboration rather than adversarial confrontation, as has happened in some other countries.
And on that note, you talked about the labour movement. Of course, today's speech or conference is also coincides with the labour movement celebrating its 50th anniversary since the modernisation seminar. Briefly, tell us, how significant is this?
I think the modernisation seminar was sort of a turning point in, I guess, the history of the labour movement in Singapore. The 50s and 60s saw unions sort of, at odds with the government of the day, and there were concerns over jobs and so on. But the modernisation seminar saw, I think, some of the early PAP leaders sort of, and union leaders as well, talk about ways to, get workers to understand the perspective of business and investors. And one key outcome of the modernisation seminar in '69 was you had unions take on a bigger role in forming cooperatives and running businesses. So one of the early results was Welcome, the precursor of today's NTUC Fair Price, right? And the aim was to keep basic necessities like groceries affordable to the average worker. And there was also, income was started later, again to provide affordable insurance for workers. And now you have NTUC sort of broaden its range of cooperatives. You have My First School, you have elder care, you have food fair and so on. And I think the aim is to ensure that workers have a range of options at affordable cost for them to sort of consider. But I think the more important outcome of this was that you had union leaders and workers have a sense of what it was like to be involved in running a business and better understand the perspective of business. And really, it's not about adversarial, that it's possible to align the interests of businesses and workers. But this will prove a challenge, and I think the task for the labour movement in the next few years is to ensure that this collaborative relationship and understanding remains the case.
And continues. Thank you so much, Zakir, for sharing a bit more about the conference, and of course, really, again, like what you mentioned, it remains to be seen the next 50 years what we can expect from NTUC, and hopefully, this good collaboration and cooperation continues between the government as well as the labour movement. Once again, to read more on this, you can visit our website at straitstimes.com. Thank you so much, Zakir.